that I jump around like crazy. But today I'm going to use the lectern because I'm speaking on a subject that's dear and near to my heart. Staying on time for our projects is very important in Toastmasters. And some of us join Toastmasters to help us not be so long-winded. And when I talk on this subject, I may have a tendency to go over, but being here at the lectern, looking at the timing lights, will help me, I hope, to strictly adhere to the timing requirements. So again, don't know how many times people after this will see me behind the lectern, but I just wanted to for people who haven't seen me do this, that yes, sometimes I do this. So all of that being said, Mr. Timer, I think we'll start the next, begin right about now, and thank you for the taping. Fellow Toastmasters and guests, last year about this time, I was at the water cooler and one of my co-workers, Lynn, came over and she said, "Clarence, can I ask you something?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, what is it with Black History Month?" So my first answer to her was, "Lynn, why are you whispering?" Secondly, I said, "Why are you asking me?" And it kind of threw her, and then she looked at me and she said, "Well, because you're Black." And I said, "What? Oh my God, you're right." Gotcha. I just wanted to lighten the mood. And I said, "Lynn, thank you for asking that question. It's a wonderful question." And so we had a brief conversation. But what I wanted to do was to share with you all a follow-up to that conversation, a little longer, a little more detail, but essentially just to present to you some of the information that I shared with her. I want to give a disclaimer. The views and perspectives that you're about to hear are mine. They have not been endorsed by the NAACP, the Urban League, the Rainbow Coalition, the NCAA, or any other organization. So what you're hearing is just one person's perspective on some information that I'd like to share. The purpose of this discussion today is basically just to let people know, to me, why Black History Month matters, why history matters, what is Black History Month, how it began, and why it's important for everyone, not just Black people. So number one, I'd just like to say, I think that history matters because there is an African symbol, there is a bird, it's called the Sankofa bird. And the Sankofa bird has the bird going forward, but the head is facing backwards and there's an egg in its mouth. And the meaning of that symbol is that we use the lessons of the past to help guide us in the decisions that we make going forward. We can learn from past mistakes or best practices and have a better future if we are willing to learn from our past. So that is one reason why I think history is important. Now, in terms of Black History Month, I want to say at the beginning that there is a metaphor of America that it is a melting pot. And what happened is Henry Ford, once upon a time at his plant in Michigan, had his workers once a year walk into a pot wearing their native costumes and the clothing of their countries, and they would all come out dressed just like Anglo-Saxon Americans. That was the thinking in those days, that the key to the success of this country was for all of us to be homogenous, to be the same. And I reject that concept. I think of America as a collage, a coat of many colors, similar maybe to the way that you look at my shirt. You see different colors. Each of the colors in America represents the people that came here from the first Americans voluntarily coming over from Asia to other groups, some who came voluntarily and some who came involuntarily. But each group has a story to tell. They've made contributions. I like to use my Toastmaster skills to build bridges and not walls between people. And one of the ways I do that is through storytelling. And today I'm just going to share a snippet, the tip of the iceberg about the story of, in this country, Black Americans, and a couple of things in terms of the overall global perspective. So number one, again, I don't think that America is a melting pot. The origin of Black History Month. Carter Woodson was an African-American historian, author, journalist. He was the second Black American to get his PhD from Harvard University, and he was the founder of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. In February 1926, he launched what was then known as Negro History Week, and it was the precursor to Black History Month. The purpose of that week, which has since expanded to the month, was to let people know about the important contributions and achievements of Black people throughout America's history, and it was later expanded to include the contributions that people of African descent, people in the diaspora, people who have come from Africa, or people who are in the Americas, wherever they are in the world, but their contributions to the world. Another thing that I just want to point out is that, number one, and there are some people who say, well, why do you limit Black History Month to 1 month? No, it's not that it's limited to 1 month, but it is 1 month in a year where we put a specific emphasis, in particular emphasis, on the contributions of Black Americans and people of African descent, the same way that during Women's History Month, we put special emphasis on women's contributions, contributions that are unknown, unrecognized, or have been downplayed. But it is something to know that it is a part of a history that is talked about throughout the year, but more emphasis during one part of the year. And the other thing that I really want to emphasize is that Black history is American history. You cannot have American history without Black history, and the reason why I say that is that the themes in Black history, freedom, justice, equality, and opportunity, are central to the American experience. Freedom, justice, equality, opportunity. You can take any social justice movement in this country, and it has been impacted, influenced, or affected by the experience of Black Americans. And I'll give you an example. The women's movement, the farm workers movement, the LBGTQ movement has been impacted. All of the different movements, the anti-war movement, the first major person first major person who had international stature to speak out against the Vietnam War was Martin Luther King. So whatever issue you want to talk about, the right to vote, the suppression of the vote, reproductive rights, freedom of the press, all of those issues are central and core to the Black experience, which is central to the American experience. Another thing that I just want to point out very quickly is that Black history began not in America, but in Africa. The governor of Virginia, as he's making amends for some missteps in his past in terms of insensitivity to Black Americans, mentioned that he is reading the 1975 blockbuster book, Roots. One of the things I always like to point out to people, Roots is a story of an African who was transported to America and successive generations of his family and how they became Black Americans or African Americans. But in Roots, the first 250 to 300 pages is set in Africa, because there was an African experience first that led to an American experience. The other thing that I'd like to say is that now, if you want to talk about the issues and concepts, number one, I just want to say that the issue of freedom, human rights, began in this country not after the Civil War, during the Civil War, but when the first person who had brought here involuntarily petitioned for freedom, when the first person tried to escape. And in all of the other times that people have struggled for freedom, justice, equality, and opportunity. The civil rights laws, if you ever get a chance, the first civil rights laws were passed in 1866. The civil rights movement didn't begin with the Montgomery bus boycott. It didn't begin with the founding of the NAACP or the Niagara movement in the early 1900s. It actually began again when people first began to ask for their rights, for freedom, and to petition colonial assemblies, and it has been a constant theme throughout. So when you look at the Montgomery bus boycotts, when you look at the March in Washington, those are just a continuation of a struggle that people have had. Another thing that I just wanted to point out as well is that there are a lot of contributions that people of African descent have made to the world that people don't recognize. If anyone's ever heard of something or things called Aesop's fables, Aesop was an Ethiopian slave in Greece who shared his stories and his fables with the children that he tutored. If anyone has ever read The Three Musketeers, The Man in the Iron Mask, The Count of Monte Cristo, Alexandre Dumas, his father was from Haiti. His father was from Haiti. His grandfather was a French nobleman. But the point is there are contributions, and I'll just try to bring some of these contributions to home very quickly. By a show of hands, has anyone today encountered a traffic signal? Traffic signal. If you've encountered a traffic signal, you benefited from a contribution of Black American Garrett Morgan. Before he transformed traffic signals, you had two colors, red and green. He was the one that introduced the use of yellow. Has anyone today been in a place called Washington, D.C.? A lot of the surveying for Washington, D.C. was done by Benjamin Banneker. And another thing that I'd just like to ask, is anyone today wearing shoes? If you were wearing shoes, the reason why I said a lot of people don't know this is that Jan Ernest Metzlinger, who was an immigrant from Suriname, was the person who introduced the way to mass produce shoes through his machines. And before that, shoes were made by hand and it was a cumbersome, slow, and expensive process. So in wrapping up, again, this is part one, and later parts will have more information. I just wanted to say, again, I hope I provided food for thought about some specific issues, and the takeaway is that African American History Month, Black History Month, is American History Month, and it matters to all of us. Madam Toastmaster.